Hello everybody, take a look at what we have today. As you can see from the box, this is the Cold Steel Bushranger Lite. And this is a knife I've kept an eye on ever since it was announced. And that reason being is because I love these clip point style blades. So when I saw this pictured, I immediately knew that I had to have it. And of course, when you're looking at the photos online of these knives, you don't know all the details quite yet. And we saw this interesting looking sliding tab right here that's a part of the lock. So I saw that as well, and that also fascinated me quite a bit. So this right here is a budget version of the Cold Steel Bushranger, and this one of course had a lot of corners cut to meet a much lower price point than you're going to get for the higher end model. So this knife right here, the blade steel is an 8CR 13 MOV, which in comparison to the S35 VN of the original is far more affordable. This knife also has, while the handle is the same shape, the material is that glass-filled nylon, so it's kind of that plastic material, but of course the texture is still really nice, so I do like that. Pocket clip is reversible for left and right hand carry, and you can see the profile of it right there. It lays pretty flush within the handle. There's a cutout for it on either side, so that's always a nice thing to see. But again, it's all about this big, I think this is like a big Bowie style blade on it. That's what drew it to me initially. But this is a big honking knife. I mean, we can see the specs listed right here on the box. So we're at 5.2 ounces, 8CR13. The blade length is 3.5 inches, and so for a lot of us that might be a medium-sized knife, maybe the upper limits of what some people are willing to carry with them on a daily basis. But again, this is, to me, a big beefy knife. Compared to a lot of the knives that I own, a lot of the knives in my collection, the Bushranger Lite here is still pretty heavy, despite the name, obviously. So let's check out the weight. I want to see if it's accurate. 5.2 ounces is advertised. And we come in at 5.09 on my scale, so that's within margin of error, I think. And in hand, though, because the handle is this plastic material, it feels fairly lightweight. It doesn't feel like a knife that's over 5 ounces. And it does feel very substantial in your hand. It feels to me like I'm holding a big knife. And when you look at that blade, this proclaimed point, this nice clip point, I mean, that really announces, hey, this guy has a knife. That's again part of the draw, I think, for this blade for a lot of people. The thickness of the blade stock, you can see how thick these thumb studs are, and we see a nice huge Torx bit in there, so they're probably removable, which is nice. The pivot right there has a huge Torx bit. I actually went and checked. That is a T15 Torx bit. So for the knife community, that's probably a pretty odd bit to be carrying around, because most knives are going to use T6 for the handle screws and T8 for the pivot. So we have a T15 Torx bit in the pivot, so very heavy duty. I mean, for a cheap knife, this is pretty solid. We do have a back lock here, but again, the difference between this lower end model and the higher end model is the higher end model has that famous Triad Lock. And a lot of Cold Steel's low-end knives have the Triad Lock as well, but one big complaint with it, one of my complaints with that, is how hard it is to actuate the lockback mechanism. This one here, super easy to manipulate. Very easy to open and close, which I like. But we do have this secondary lock feature right here. You can see that sliding tab. So right now it's in the open position. And you can open the knife normally. Now if that were to be in the up position, you cannot open this knife. And now while it won't fully open, I did notice, taking a look at the blade, it does come out a little bit from the handle, so there's a chance on your blade you might get a little bit of pokey tip sticking out if you were to try to pull it open. And again, use scenario, probably not ever going to happen, but just something to notice. Again, once it's slid open though, the blade flicks out pretty easily. And of course, once the blade's open, you can also lock it right up into place. And it will lock that knife open. So now you cannot manipulate the lock back. So if you try to manipulate it, you'll notice there's a little bit of movement there that you're getting out of the handle, but not that much. And that movement doesn't happen just on its own. It's rock solid on its own. But let's take a look inside and see if we can get a glimpse in that mechanism, because basically they're just covering the lock bar there. So you can see that sliding tab a little bit in there. Let me try and see if I can move it. So you can see, there you go. It's just covering the lock back mechanism in the back while it slides. So I imagine if you wanted to, I haven't really tried it yet, but we do have the 2 screws on here. I imagine if you wanted to, you could turn these down and maybe keep the knife fixed in either a closed or open position. I haven't tried it yet though, because I'm not wanting to torque them down and really risk stripping the screws, but that could be an option. But one thing, of course, I noticed handle-wise when I'm holding this knife is that we have a lot of weight here on this end, on this big heavy blade, and the handle, of course, is fairly lightweight. So on the back end of the handle, it feels almost too light back here. Like there's some meat back here to hold on to, but compared to what we have up in the front, it just feels a little bit empty back here. And I think a lanyard through this nice big lanyard hole could help with that issue. Having a nice big fat lanyard there could help give you better purchase on the knife. But it's noticeable in hand. The blade wants to fall forward. It wants to reach the ground. But these are just very small nitpicks. Because again, right out of the box, I'm not seeing really any flaws with the knife. It has this nice satin finish on it. You can see my fingerprints got picked up on it. But definitely like how the light shines off of it. And I definitely like that the pocket clip itself is kind of grayed out. So it's not super shiny and obtrusive, because you are going to have a fair amount of knife hanging out of your pocket with this. But at an over 5-ounce knife, may not be EDC for everybody, but still an interesting blade. This is one I've been looking forward to, and it's really nice to see that they're coming out with knives where you can get an affordable version at $30. You can get an affordable version of this knife as opposed to paying $130, $140 for the high-end version with G10 handles, S35VN, Triad Lock. So before we go anywhere, I'm just going to lay this down. I'm going to give you a size comparison really quick. Here's a ZT 350. So let's just lay them pivot to pivot, and you can see basic size comparison there. So again, the 350 is also a pretty beefy, heavy-duty knife, and overall length is slightly lower than the Bushranger Lite. I was looking in my collection trying to find a knife that would be very comparable, at least in terms of the handle and the thickness of this handle. And the only one I could really find was my Emerson. So this right here is a CQC 14, and the handle size is very comparable, the way it feels in hand. Now the blade is totally different, of course. This is the stubby version, but when you look at these two handles, very comparable knives there. So they feel very similar in hand. If anything, the cold steel is a little more contoured because it's this plastic, so it's rounded off and smooth on the edges, as opposed to the G10 on my Emerson. So trying to find a beast to compare this to wasn't the easiest task in the world, but I did find some knives there. But again, if anyone has any questions about this knife, or any comments on Cold Steel's current offerings, I do like their EDC lineup. They're coming up with a lot of good stuff each year. And so one of my most popular videos is actually about the Cold Steel Pro Lite, which is another very nice budget lockback, Triad Lock on that one. So check out that video if you want to see more about that. But that's a very tried and true model, been out for a long time. And this one here is a little better than that, 8CR13 MOV steel. Not the Triad Lock, but still very smooth to manipulate, which for some, I think that might be preferable, as opposed to that really tough opening and closing mechanism on the Triad. But again, any questions, guys, you let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to respond. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.